Cancer. The crying started before the aircraft doors even closed, a piercing, desperate wail that sliced through the quiet hum of the cabin like a siren no one could escape. Cancer. Heads turned sharply, eyes narrowed. Cancer. And soft groans of annoyance rippled across the rows as a sharply dressed man in a tailored navy suit desperately bounced a red-faced baby against his chest. Cancer. His hands trembled, his jaw clenched, and the polished composure expected of a powerful CEO crumbled with every sob that came from the tiny girl in his arms. Cancer. He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering soundless pleas, but nothing eased her distress. The flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances. Cancer, already bracing themselves for a difficult journey. What no one knew was that the man, Adrian Mercer, one of the youngest and most admired CEOs in the country, Cancer, had not slept more than an hour and 3 nights, and this single Cancer, overcrowded daytime flight held the power to determine not only the future of his company, but the future of the child who now screamed uncontrollably. The stress, Cancer, the exhaustion, and the overwhelming isolation of single parenthood pressed down on him like a weight he could no longer carry. Cancer. And for the first time in his meticulously controlled life, Adrian felt himself unravel in front of strangers. Cancer. If you're watching this and believe in kindness and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Kind Hearts Corner. Cancer. Your support helps spread stories that remind the world that compassion still matters. As the aircraft began taxiing, the crying intensified. Cancer. The pressure changes were painful for little ears, and baby Mira's face turned a deeper shade of red as she kicked and arched, overwhelmed with discomfort. Cancer. A woman in the row ahead turned around with an icy glare, covering her ears dramatically. Cancer. A man across the aisle muttered loudly about parents who should control their kids and asked why babies were allowed on planes at all. Cancer. Adrian tightened his grip around Mira, trying to soothe her with gentle rocking, but his movements were stiff with panic. Sweat beaded at his temples. Cancer. And his usually steady breathing became shallow. Cancer. The elegant image the public always saw, the confident executive in crisp suits giving speeches to hundreds, collapsed completely in this cramped space filled with judgment and impatience. Cancer. He felt exposed, helpless, and utterly alone. Only a few months earlier, his life had looked entirely different. He had shared a bright home with his wife Soraya. Cancer, whose laughter filled every room and whose touch calmed both him and Mira effortlessly. She had been his anchor, his partner in every decision. Cancer, both personal and professional. Her sudden passing during a routine medical procedure shattered everything. Cancer. One moment she was smiling and promising to bake cookies when she returned home. Cancer. And the next Adrian was standing in a hospital corridor holding an infant who would never know her mother's voice. Cancer. The world applauded him for continuing to run his company and raise his daughter, labeling him a symbol of strength. Cancer. But no one saw the nights he cried silently while pacing with Mira in the dark. Cancer. Or the mornings he stared at empty bottles in the sink wondering how he was supposed to survive another day. This flight was supposed to be simple. Cancer. A short daytime journey from one city to another for a board meeting that investors insisted must happen in person. Adrian had begged them to postpone. Cancer. Explaining that Mira had been ill and restless, but they refused, threatening to withdraw funding. So he packed a stroller, a diaper bag, paperwork, Cancer, and the fragile remnants of his stamina, hoping Mira would sleep through most of the flight. Instead, the moment the engines roared, she dissolved into distress. Cancer. The flight attendants approached with polite smiles that didn't hide their concern. One, a young woman named Celeste, Cancer, offered warm water and advice about ear pressure, but nothing worked. Adrian tried everything, bottle, pacifier, rocking, Cancer, walking the aisle. But Mira only screamed harder. A businessman in first class demanded to speak to the captain. Another passenger pressed the call button repeatedly, Cancer, insisting something be done. Adrian's heart hammered painfully. The humiliation burned. He felt the weight of every glare, every whispered complaint, Cancer, every sigh of frustration. But beneath the embarrassment was a deeper fear. Mira's cries weren't just loud. They were desperate, strained, Cancer, different from her usual fussing. He recognized the sound from the night Soraya passed, when Mira sensed the tension and wailed with the same heartbreaking fear. Cancer. Something inside Adrian snapped, not in anger, but in sheer emotional overload. He sank into his seat, holding Mira close. Cancer. And for the first time since he became a father, tears streamed openly down his face. The passengers around him froze, cancer, startled by the sight of a powerful man breaking so completely. Celeste knelt beside him, her voice gentle but unsure, cancer. She asked if she could take Mira for a moment to give him a chance to breathe, but Adrian shook his head weakly. He whispered that he couldn't let go, cancer, that he had failed everyone he loved, that he didn't know what he was doing anymore. His words came out fractured, but the pain behind them was unmistakable, cancer. Celeste, moved but unable to help further, stood quietly, unsure of what to do. Then, with trembling hands and a voice still thick with emotion, cancer. Adrian did something that left the entire crew speechless. He stood up in the aisle, clutching Mira to his chest, cancer, and addressed the passengers. Not with anger or excuses, but with raw honesty, cancer. He told them he was a single father traveling alone for the first time since losing his wife, that his daughter was in pain and terrified, cancer, and that he was doing everything he could. He lifted his business card from his pocket, revealing his identity as the CEO of Mercer Innovate, cancer, a detail that made several passengers gasp. Cancer. He said he would personally reimburse every passenger for their ticket if they felt their comfort had been ruined by his situation. He didn't want sympathy, he said, cancer. He simply wanted understanding for a child who didn't know how to express her discomfort any other way. The cabin fell silent. Cancer. Even the man who had complained the loudest lowered his head. The woman who had glared softened her expression, suddenly aware of the humanity in front of her. Cancer. Celeste stared at Adrian in disbelief, overwhelmed by the vulnerability and generosity displayed. No passenger or crew member had ever witnessed a CEO, cancer, known for decisive power and financial strength, stand in the aisle holding a crying baby with tears in his eyes, cancer, offering to take on the burden of every person on the plane. Slowly, something beautiful happened. The tension dissolved, cancer. The businessman who had demanded action offered noise, canceling headphones to nearby passengers, cancer. The woman who had glared reached into her bag and handed Adrian a small bottle of essential oil she used for calming her own children, cancer. A young mother across the aisle offered advice about relieving ear pressure and suggested gently massaging behind Mira's ears, cancer. Celeste brought warm towels and soft blankets, creating a more comforting cocoon around the baby. A teenager in the back began softly humming a lullaby, cancer, and soon others joined in, their voices forming a calm, soothing atmosphere. Mira's cries gradually softened, her tiny body relaxing against Adrian's chest, cancer. She hiccuped once, then finally drifted into an exhausted sleep. The cabin let out a collective breath relief. Adrian sank into his seat, cancer, holding Mira as though she were the most precious thing in the world, grateful beyond words. For the first time in months, he felt supported, not judged, cancer. He realized that despite his wealth and status, what he needed most was compassion from ordinary people who understood struggle, cancer. The remainder of the flight passed peacefully. Passengers smiled at Adrian as they moved about, offering snacks, tissues, and kind words, cancer. The businessman from first class stopped by to apologize, admitting he had forgotten what it was like to travel with small children. Celeste checked on him frequently, cancer, her earlier uncertainty replaced with admiration. Even the captain invited Adrian to visit the cockpit after landing as a gesture of goodwill. As the plane descended, cancer, sunlight flooded the cabin, illuminating the peaceful scene of a once chaotic journey transformed by empathy. Adrian gazed out the window, watching clouds drift below, cancer, and felt a profound shift within himself. He realized that vulnerability was not weakness. Opening his heart had not diminished him as a leader or a father. Instead, cancer, it had allowed others to step forward with kindness, turning a moment of despair into a shared human experience. Near the end, if this story touched your heart, cancer, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kind Heart's Corner so more people can hear stories that remind them of the power of compassion. When the plane landed, cancer, applause broke out, not because of the arrival, but in recognition of the emotional journey everyone had shared. Adrian thanked the passengers sincerely, cancer, declining to reimburse anyone and instead promising to fund a program providing travel assistance for single parents in crisis. Cancer. The announcement stunned the crew and passengers alike, turning his earlier offer into something far more meaningful and lasting. Just before the ending, cancer. Please comment about the moment that moved you the most.